Pompeii, destroyed in 79 AD by the eruption of Mount Vesuvius. That's the story every school, every documentary, every museum has told you for your entire life. Now, what if the actual date was 1631? That would mean our official history of Pompeii is off by exactly 1,552 years. And what's more unsettling, there are at least 9 separate pieces of evidence that point directly to that number. Here's what the history books agree on. In 79 AD, Mount Vesuvius erupted. The ancient Roman city of Pompeii, along with the nearby city of Herculaneum, was buried under 4 to 6 meters of volcanic ash. The cities were abandoned, their names were forgotten, their locations disappeared from memory. Then, in 1592, an Italian architect named Domenico Fontana stumbled across some ancient walls while digging a water channel. He looked around, covered things back up, and moved on. Nothing came of it. The real rediscovery, the one that stuck, happened in 1748, when a Spanish military engineer named Roque Joaquín de Alcubierre began intentional excavations of the site. That's the official version. Pompeii was lost for roughly 1,600 years. Nobody knew it was there, nobody talked about it, nobody mapped it. Except they did. And that's where the questions start. As always, everything I share here is the best of what I've been able to piece together. If something sits differently with what you know, please don't take it personally, and neither will I. Think of me as someone who reads a lot but certainly hasn't read everything. Nothing I present here is the final word. Evidence changes, understanding shifts. I'd far rather be honestly uncertain than confidently wrong. Now let's get into this. Let's start with the simplest problem. If Pompeii was lost, truly lost, location unknown, name forgotten, then it should be absent from every map made before 1748. It isn't. There is a 1514 map. There is a 1570 map by the celebrated cartographer Abraham Ortelius, the same man whose accuracy we talked about in a previous video. There is a 1575 map by Antonio Lafreri, and a 1603 map by Philippe Cluver. All of them show the region. All of them reference details that a cartographer could only know if the city was either still standing or had only recently been destroyed. But maps can be explained away. Cartographers make mistakes. They copy older maps. So let's look at something harder to dismiss. In 1633, just 2 years after the major eruption of Vesuvius in 1631, an artist named Giovanni Battista Mascolo produced 2 detailed etchings. One shows Mount Vesuvius before the eruption, one shows it after. These etchings are documented, dated, and preserved. They are explicitly tied to the eruption of 1631, not 79 AD, 1631. And then there is the Epitafio de Portice. Following the 1631 eruption, the Viceroy of Naples ordered a stone inscription to be placed as a public warning, a reminder of what the volcano had done and what it could do again. That inscription is still standing today, and carved into it in Latin are 2 specific names, Pompeii and Herculaneum. A stone warning placed in 1631, referencing 2 cities that, according to official history, had been lost and unnamed for over 1,500 years. Someone who ordered that inscription in 1631 knew exactly what those cities were and exactly where they were. Maps can be questioned, etchings can be debated, but the next 2 pieces of evidence are sitting right now in some of the most respected museums in the world, and they are extremely difficult to explain. Walk into the Museo Archeologico Nacional in Naples, and you can see a Roman fresco excavated from Pompeii. It depicts the 3 Graces, 3 female figures in a classical pose. It dates, officially, to the 1st century AD. Now walk into the Musée Condé in Chantilly, France, and you will find an oil painting by Raphael, one of the most important artists of the Italian Renaissance. It also depicts the 3 Graces. Raphael painted his version somewhere between 1503 and 1505. Pompeii was not discovered until 1748, so either Raphael had access to a Pompeii fresco that supposedly didn't exist yet, or both works were produced in the same general era. You can look at both images side by side and decide what you think. But if that one gives you pause, this next one is harder to shake. In the Palazzo Massimo alle Terme in Rome, there is a Roman mosaic floor. It dates officially to the early 1st century AD. It was found in Pompeii. It depicts a basket of fruit, figs, grapes, pomegranates, and sitting right there among them, unmistakably, is a pineapple. There's also a fresco in Pompeii's House of the Ephebi, same thing, a pineapple, painted on a wall in a city destroyed in 79 AD. Here is the problem with that. The pineapple is indigenous to South America. Christopher Columbus encountered it for the first time in 1493 on the island of Guadalupe. He brought it back to Spain. It was the first bromeliad ever introduced to Europe from the New World. That was 1493. Pompeii officially was destroyed in 79 AD, 14 centuries before Columbus ever saw a pineapple. For a Roman artist in 79 AD to paint a pineapple, someone in ancient Rome would have had to sail to South America, find the fruit, bring it back, and hand it to a Pompeii fresco painter, all without leaving a single other trace in the historical record. Or Pompeii was still a living city in the 1500s and beyond. We've looked at what's on the walls. Now let's look at what's underneath the city, because this is where the case becomes genuinely hard to argue with. This is the most important part of this entire video. In 1592, remember, officially 1,513 years after Pompeii was buried under 20 feet of ash, the Italian architect Domenico Fontana was commissioned to dig an underground water channel to bring water to the nearby town of Torre Annunziata. The channel ran directly through what we now call Pompeii. As Fontana dug, he encountered walls, roadways, painted frescoes, inscriptions. He noted them and, in most cases, covered them back over and continued. Historians have called this either a broad-minded act of preservation or a form of censorship given the sexual content of some of the paintings. But here's the detail that archaeologists have consistently declined to explain. Along Fontana's water conduit, built in 1592, running through a city supposedly buried under 20 feet of volcanic ash, there are water wells, functioning, purposefully constructed water wells built as part of the conduit infrastructure. Think about what that means. If the city of Pompeii had truly been buried under 20 feet of ash since 79 AD, then in 1592, you would be digging 20 feet below the surface. The surface above you would be the top of the ash layer. To build a water well from inside the tunnel, you would need to dig upward through 15 more feet of compacted volcanic ash just to reach the open air. Nobody builds a well from the bottom of a 20-foot ash deposit. It would be useless, structurally ridiculous, and completely contrary to any practical engineering logic. A functioning water well only makes sense if the ground level at the time of construction was the ground level of an active, unburied city. The wells exist. They are documented. They have been photographed. And the question of how they got there from inside a tunnel dug through a city that was supposedly already 20 feet underground has never received a satisfying official answer. There is also a later record worth mentioning. An etching by Francesco Piranesi from 1788, the son of the famous Giovanni Battista Piranesi, shows the Temple of Isis in Pompeii. In the lower right corner of the etching, you can see an access point to Fontana's water conduit through one of those same wells, with a triangular topped cover. Piranesi labeled it in Latin. Translated, his label reads, "A well with 2 windows covered with movable covers, where the ashes of the victims were thrown." That well access point was later significantly altered. By the time modern photographs were taken, its original form had been changed. But on a 19th century postcard of the same site, the well was still largely intact. Something about that well, it seems, needed to look different. 2 more items, and then we'll bring it all together. In 1945, excavators uncovered a stone tablet at Pompeii, a word square written in Latin known as the Rhodas square. The letters spell out Sator arepo tenet opera Rhodas, a palindrome that works in multiple directions. That alone is interesting. But what caught the attention of researchers is that the same letters can be rearranged to form 2 repetitions of the phrase Pater Noster, our Father, in the shape of a cross, with the letters A and O left over, as in Alpha and Omega. The opening and closing of the Christian prayer, the first and last letters of the Greek alphabet, used in the book of Revelation to describe God. Christian imagery in a city destroyed before the Christian era had fully spread through Rome. The standard explanation offered is that the word square was scratched in by people who dug into Pompeii after the eruption. That is possible. It is also an explanation that was created to fit the date, not one that emerged from the evidence itself. Then there are the surgical tools. In a structure now known as the House of the Surgeon, excavators found a collection of 40 medical instruments, steel and bronze, forceps, catheters, needles, scalpels. Researchers who analyzed them noted that they were, quote, strikingly similar to modern surgical instruments. One analysis concluded that Roman medicine, as evidenced by these tools, was so advanced that it was surpassed until the 19th century. And yet, the tools are dated to the 1st century AD. Compare them to documented surgical tools from the 16th and 17th centuries, and the resemblance is striking, not vaguely similar, functionally and structurally comparable. A metallurgical curiosity, given that ancient Roman metalworking, based on every other surviving record, was primarily limited to copper, gold, and soft metals. The precision steel instruments found at Pompeii represent a level of craftsmanship that does not align with what the rest of the historical record tells us about that era. So let's place all of this on the table. Maps from 1514 through 1603 showing a city that was supposedly unnamed and forgotten, etchings from 1633 explicitly tied to the 1631 eruption, not 79 AD, a stone inscription placed by a viceroy in 1631 naming Pompeii and Herculaneum by name, a fresco identical to a Raphael painting 240 years before Pompeii was officially found, a pineapple painted on a Roman wall 14 centuries before Europeans had any knowledge of the fruit's existence, a water conduit dug through a supposedly buried city with functioning wells that only make sense in an unburied one, an artist in the 1780s who knew the interior details of unexcavated buildings, Christian symbols in a pre-Christian city, surgical tools that match the craftsmanship of 17th century Europe. None of these on their own closes the case. Some have been challenged, some remain genuinely unresolved. But together, they raise a question that is harder to dismiss than any one of them alone. What if the 1631 eruption of Vesuvius is the event that actually destroyed Pompeii, and the date of 79 AD was attached to the story long after the fact? If that is true, it would not just change a date, it would change the context of everything built around that date. The Roman historians quoted to support it, the emperors whose reigns are tied to it, the entire timeline that connects ancient Rome to the world we think we understand today. That is a very large thread to pull. Whether you think it's worth pulling, that's the question I'll leave with you. If this made you think, share it, and there are more videos on this channel that go just as deep.